Idia was the mother of Esige, the famous mother of Esige. She was a great queen.
During the colonial era, countless historic artifacts were looted from around the world and taken to Europe. But now, there's a growing campaign to return them to their countries of origin. Among the most famous are the Benin Bronzes seized from modern-day Nigeria. In an unprecedented move, the University of Aberdeen is returning a Benin Bronze back to Nigeria. George Boyne, the university's principal and vice-chancellor, said in a statement,
"It would not have been right to have retained an item of such great cultural importance that was acquired in such reprehensible circumstances. We therefore decided that an unconditional return is the most appropriate action we can take and are grateful for the close collaboration with our partners in Nigeria."
Although they're called Benin Bronzes, they're actually a large number of metal and ivory sculptures and carvings which were stolen by the British military in 1897 during the destruction of the West African Kingdom of Benin, located in modern-day Nigeria's Edo state. Many of the soldiers and individuals involved sold thousands of Benin objects to museums or private collectors. Others were later given as gifts or sold at auctions. When some were displayed in the British Museum that autumn, they caused a sensation. You must remember, the justification of colonizing and enslaving a continent of people was based on the lie that Africans were savage beasts stuck in primitive conditions until the Europeans were compassionate enough to liberate them. Africans, the British believed at the time, did not possess skills to produce pieces of such sophistication or beauty, nor were they supposed to have much history. But the bronzes, some which portrayed Portuguese visitors in medieval armour, were evidently hundreds of years old. Benin had been denigrated in British newspapers as a place of savagery, a city of blood. Those same newspapers described the bronzes as surprising, remarkable, and admitted they were baffled. Some of these bronzes are still owned by descendants of those who pillaged Benin, while others have passed from owner to owner. Over the last 40 years, there have been growing calls for the return of such items which have become symbols of injustice. The craft workers of Benin often showed Europeans in their art. Most of these foreign figures have long, narrow faces and straight, shoulder-length hair. Sometimes they have a beard, and sometimes they wear armour and hold a gun. Even though the Europeans were very different, they were welcomed by the people of Benin. The Obas had a good relationship with merchants from Europe until the 1800s. Then the Europeans changed their terms. Instead of doing business and trading with the African kingdoms, they felt they should have their land for themselves. So in the late 1800s, European countries competed with each other for African land. They seized control of the African kingdoms and built their own empires. According to Victor Ehikameno, an artist from Edo State, the art wasn't created solely to be enjoyed visually. Victor said they were our documents, our archives, the photographs of our kings. When they were taken, our history was exhumed.
The final, rather a first step in redressing the imbalance in the narratives of that dark colonial period that often posit Africa as dark and primitive and bestial and in need of the civilization processes of British colonialism. In the case of Benin, it's particularly potent because when Harry Rawson and his not-so-merry men came to Benin in 1897, it was a punitive action, but it was also an action of erasure. It was an action of erasure because not only did they plunder hundreds of Benin bronzes, many that can be seen in the British Museum, in institutions like the University of Aberdeen, and across the world, but they also destroyed this incredible kingdom, including the walls of Benin, walls that have been noted by historians and commentators, as well as chroniclers in the 16th century, as being longer and more ornate than the Great Wall of China. Erasure of history starts with artifacts. Once artifacts move from their home and are taken away from their context, people don't know who they are. And it's a very effective tactic within warfare and also within colonization to dehumanize and to direct and project whatever the conquerors wish to project. In the case of the Benin bronzes, which were often attributed to being so sophisticated due to the kingdom's interaction with the Portuguese in the 15th century, something that again was only recently debunked, it's particularly potent.
Museums across the world have been discussing the Benin Bronzes in their collections and are supporting the creation of the Edo Museum of West African Art in Benin City to display the returned items under agreements wrought by all parties. This all began when the University of Aberdeen instigated a conversation through Professor Bankole Sodigbo, the Nigerian professor of law at Babcock University, with the National Commission for Museums and Monuments of Nigeria. The Nigerian government then gave its backing through the Federal Ministry of Information and Culture and its minister, Alhaji Lai Mohammed. This has now led to the University of Aberdeen becoming the first institution to agree to the full repatriation from a museum of a Benin bronze.
I think it's particularly important and particularly brave of the University of Aberdeen to do this because, again, right now, there are debates and discussions trying to undermine many of the atrocities that were made in the name of Crown and Country, both within the British Empire and also in the Americas during slavery, and also even with communities in Asia who also suffered from many desecrations and dismantling of traditional polities. Once we have our artefacts back on ground, we can place them in their context. Once we have our artefacts back on ground, they can belong to our scholarship. Once we have our artefacts back on ground, they become our truth.
The university is now making arrangements for the return of the head of an Oba and is working in collaboration to organise a celebratory event to mark its homecoming. So I must ask, what's the relevance of the timing and how does it affect those of us in the diaspora?
Our artefacts belong on the continent because when they're on the continent, they give nuance, they give context, and they give root and foundation to many of the vibrant activities happening the here and now. For our children who are in the diaspora or people of diasporan generations, it's also important because hand in hand with Black Lives Matter movements, we also need to know who we are and where we're from. To use the euphemism, these are the receipts that prove that Africa has always been great.